Senator, again, that's a hypothetical situation. There are federal laws that prohibit the stationing of troops at polling places. However, right, the question would be whether or not the degree to which that would apply in a non-federalized status under Title 32, and it would depend on the status of the personnel and the mission parameters that are being contemplated.
So it's possible that if you were asked, if you said, look, we've got a problem in Chicago, right? We've talked about federal troops in Chicago. We need to put uniformed military surrounding polling locations in downtown Chicago. Are there circumstances in which you would approve that?
Senator, I would say this, is that during COVID, when many poll workers were unavailable, many state and local jurisdictions
But you can understand, I understand during COVID, but you can understand that when there's a trust deficit, right? When the President of the United States...
Did you hear that measured bureaucratic doublespeak just there? That careful sidestepping? That bloodless euphemism wrapped in plausible deniability masquerading as official protocol? Because there's a reason White House spokespeople don't just come out and say what they actually mean. And it's because when they do say what they mean, when they strip away that thin veneer of civility, what you get is the unvarnished truth of this administration's pathological fixation on destroying any black woman who dares to challenge their grip on power. Trump himself called Jasmine Crockett a low IQ person, and declared her entrance into the Texas Senate race a gift to Republicans, which should tell you everything you need to know about how seriously they're actually taking this brilliant civil rights attorney who graduated from law school and built a career defending the most vulnerable among us, while Trump was bankrupting casinos and hosting reality television shows. And let's be exquisitely clear about what we just witnessed in that clip, because this wasn't just some offhand remark from a junior press aide fumbling through talking points. This was a calculated message delivered from the podium, representing the official position of an administration that has made targeting successful black women in positions of authority its unofficial but unmistakable governing philosophy. Crockett has built a reputation as one of President Trump's fiercest critics in Congress, and now she has made national headlines by clashing with President Trump as she launches what could be the most consequential Senate race in Texas in a generation, threatening to upend Republican hegemony in a state they've controlled for over 3 decades. Wait until you understand the full historical weight of this moment, because Republicans haven't lost a statewide race in Texas in more than 30 years, 30 years of uninterrupted conservative rule that has systematically dismantled the social safety net, gutted public education, denied health care to millions, and created an economic apartheid system that keeps working families trapped in cycles of poverty while corporate interests write legislation directly from their boardrooms. And here comes Jasmine Crockett, a second-term congresswoman who has skyrocketed to fame through viral spats with Republicans, declaring that she's running to challenge the Republican establishment and Trump himself, launching her campaign with a video featuring Trump's own insults against her, essentially weaponizing his misogyny and racism back against him in the most brilliant political judo move we've seen in years. But here's where this gets absolutely explosive, and why MAGA world is genuinely terrified even as they pretend to be gleeful about her candidacy. Crockett posted a video before her speech in which Trump's voice can be heard insulting her and calling her a very low IQ person, then turns to the camera, crosses her arms and smiles, with the message Crockett for U.S. Senate, understanding something fundamental about contemporary political communication that the ossified Democratic establishment has been too timid or too stupid to grasp, which is that voters are exhausted by candidates who apologize, who equivocate, who moderate their positions to appeal to some imaginary swing voter who doesn't exist, and what they actually respond to is authenticity and righteous fury channeled through brilliant strategic thinking. Now the conventional wisdom among the Beltway intelligentsia and the concerned trolling centrists who dominate Democratic Party infrastructure will tell you that Crockett is too outspoken, too controversial, too unapologetically black and female to win in a state Trump carried by double digits, and some Democrats fear the move by Crockett, a popular but controversial figure within her party, could make the task even harder in a state President Trump won by double digits last fall, which reveals everything wrong with Democratic political strategy for the past 30 years, because they've been running away from their most passionate voices, their most committed organizers, their most dynamic communicators, all in service of chasing Republican voters who will never ever support them. But watch what happens next, because this is where the bombshell really drops, and where Republican confidence starts to crack beneath the surface. Despite joining the field late, Crockett poses a clear threat to Tallarico, having outperformed him in public polling of the Democratic electorate this fall, and according to a recent poll by the University of Houston and Texas Southern University, Crockett would win a primary with 31%, leading the field even though she entered the race at literally the last possible moment, which tells you that Democratic voters are absolutely starving for someone who will fight back against Trump's authoritarianism with the same ferocity and moral clarity that the moment demands. And here's what makes Trump's wholly unqualified comment so historically obscene, so morally bankrupt, so transparently rooted in the deepest, ugliest strains of American racism and misogyny. Jasmine Crockett is a civil rights attorney. She served in the Texas state legislature where she became a national figure during the Democrats' dramatic quorum break to block Republican voter suppression legislation. She touted her leadership in the quorum break when she campaigned for the U.S. House in 2022, and now represents the seat that recently deceased Democrat Eddie Bernice Johnson had held since 1993, inheriting the mantle from one legendary black congresswoman and now reaching for something even bigger. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, the man calling her unqualified, is a convicted felon, a serial sexual predator found liable for sexual abuse in civil court, a fraudster who ran a fake university that scammed working people out of their savings, a tax cheat who pays less in federal income taxes than a public school teacher, a wannabe autocrat who incited a violent insurrection against the United States Capitol when he lost an election, and yet somehow, in the diseased logic of American white supremacy, he gets to stand in judgment of a brilliant black woman's qualifications. Let's excavate the deeper currents here, because this isn't just about one Senate race or one candidate or even one election cycle. This is about a systematic pattern that researchers and political scientists have documented extensively. Black women have been ascending to roles of political prominence in recent years in ways we haven't seen before, including big city mayors like Bowser, Bass, and Lee, along with high-profile Trump critic U.S. Rep. Jasmine Crockett, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and former Vice President Kamala Harris, and at precisely the moment when black women are breaking through the multiple barriers of racism and sexism to claim positions of power, we're witnessing a coordinated campaign from the Trump administration to destroy them professionally, legally, and politically. This isn't speculation or hyperbole. This is documented fact. A growing list of high-profile black women in public service are under increased scrutiny by the Trump administration, including Letitia James, the first black woman elected as Attorney General of New York, and Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, women who have committed no crime except exercising the authority of their offices in ways that threaten Trump's interests or challenge his narrative of absolute dominion. And what makes Crockett such a uniquely dangerous figure to the MAGA movement is that she refuses to play by the rules of respectability politics that have constrained previous generations of black political leaders. She has seen her national profile grow thanks to a series of viral moments spurred by her blunt, unapologetic rhetorical style, including her personal criticisms of GOP Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene, whom she described as having a bleach-blonde, bad-built, butch body, turning the language of insult back against her attackers with such precision and wit that millions of young people who've never watched C-SPAN in their lives suddenly found themselves glued to congressional proceedings. Now here's where the stakes get absolutely existential, and why this race matters far beyond Texas. Democrats need a net gain of 4 Senate seats to wrest control from Republicans next November, when most of the seats up for re-election are in states like Texas that President Donald Trump won last year, which means the path back to Senate control runs directly through states where Democrats have been losing for decades, requiring precisely the kind of transformational candidate who can expand the electorate rather than chase diminishing returns from moderate voters who keep drifting rightward. Crockett has said that she could not count on Republicans crossing over to support her, and that like the Trump and Obama phenomena, she would need to bring out people that historically did not vote, believing that's the only way to win in Texas, which demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of political demography that mainstream Democrats have been either unwilling or unable to internalize, this recognition that you don't win by moving to the center, you win by energizing the people who have been left out of the political system entirely. And look at what happened the moment she announced. Colin Allred, the 2024 Democratic nominee who lost to Ted Cruz by 8 points, decided to exit the Senate race, clearing the field for Crockett after she called him and shared her internal polling, showing she had a better path to victory, which takes real political courage because Allred could have stayed in the race, could have split the vote, could have made everything more difficult, but instead recognized that the moment called for something different than what the Democratic establishment had been offering. But prepare yourself for what comes next, because the MAGA propaganda machine is going to unleash everything in its arsenal against Crockett. We're already seeing the preview. Republicans are reportedly happy about her announcement, having executed a coordinated plan to get her to run by including her in a July poll, showing her as the leading Democrat and then working to amplify that poll to launch her to the top of the political conversation in the state, believing that she's too progressive, too outspoken, too black to win a general election, fundamentally misunderstanding that their own racism isn't a reflection of the Texas electorate, but rather a projection of their own fears. And here's the part that should chill everyone paying attention. A person showed up at Crockett's D.C. office and made white supremacist threats and hand gestures, and she criticized Trump for putting a literal target on lawmakers' backs by spreading hate and lies and openly calling for the death of sitting members of Congress, which isn't hyperbole or partisan exaggeration, but the documented reality of serving in Congress while black and female under a Trump administration that has normalized political violence and weaponized white grievance as a governing strategy. The historical echoes here are deafening if you have any understanding of American political development, because we've seen this script before, after Reconstruction, when black politicians who'd been elected to Congress and state legislatures across the South were systematically targeted, terrorized, and removed from office through a combination of legal manipulation, economic pressure, and outright violence, and what followed was a century of white supremacist rule that took the civil rights movement to even partially dismantle. We're watching in real time as they try to run the same playbook, deploying every tool at their disposal to ensure that black women who dare to wield political power pay the maximum price for their ambition. But here's what Trump and his sycophants fundamentally misunderstand about Jasmine Crockett and the movement she represents. She's not running a traditional campaign built on focus-grouped messaging and consultant-driven incrementalism. She told a crowd in Dallas that she wants to turn Texas blue, and said there are those who say, "Ain't no way, we done tried this 50 kinds of ways. Let me be clear, y'all ain't never tried it the JC way," which captures something essential about her theory of change. This recognition that doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results is the definition of insanity, and that what Texas Democrats need isn't another moderate compromise candidate, but someone who will actually fight. And when you examine her record in Congress, what you find is someone who understands that congressional hearings aren't just procedural formalities, but opportunities to speak directly to the American people. She dressed down Marjorie Taylor Greene with an alliterative flourish, and tangled with Nancy Mace over white privilege, and her committee work has spawned YouTube highlight reels and a Saturday Night Live parody, building a national following by doing something that should be completely unremarkable, but has somehow become revolutionary in contemporary Democratic politics, which is speaking plainly about the reality of Republican governance and refusing to pretend that fascism deserves civility. Now the Republican primary on the other side is its own absolute circus of MAGA excess. Republican incumbent Senator John Cornyn, Attorney General Ken Paxton, and U.S. Rep. Wesley Hunt are locked in a closely watched battle for the GOP nomination, which means Republicans are going to spend months tearing each other apart in a race to prove who's the most loyal to Trump, who's the most extreme on immigration, who can promise the most draconian cruelty against transgender children, basically competing to see who can sink furthest into the moral abyss, while Democrats have the opportunity to present a clear alternative vision. Cornyn said that as the GOP nominee for U.S. Senate, the campaign will make sure every Texas voter knows how absurd Crockett's candidacy is, while Paxton predicted she would lose by double digits, which is exactly what you'd expect them to say, but also reveals their genuine nervousness, because if they were really confident, they wouldn't be spending so much time talking about a candidate they claim is unelectable. And look at the broader pattern of Trump's attacks on black women throughout his political career, because this isn't an isolated incident or random personal animus. This is a consistent ideological position. President Donald Trump attacked 6 prominent black women in the 3 days after the midterm elections that resulted in Democrats taking House control from the Republicans, calling journalists April Ryan, Abby Phillip, and Yamache Alcindor stupid, hostile, and racist for asking completely legitimate questions that any professional would ask, revealing that in Trump's deranged worldview, black women are uniquely unqualified to question his authority. The psychology here is transparent to anyone who studied authoritarian movements or paid attention to how patriarchy and white supremacy function. Black women represent everything that threatens the MAGA worldview because they exist at the intersection of racial and gender oppression, meaning they can see with perfect clarity how systems of domination operate, and when they speak that truth to power, when they refuse to be deferential or grateful or quiet, they become intolerable to men who've built their entire identity on the assumption of their own superiority. Black Americans have traditionally been overrepresented in the federal workforce when compared to broader labor participation. About 19% of the federal workforce was black, and black employees made up as much as 1/3 or more of the staff at agencies such as the Department of Education, Treasury, and Housing and Urban Development, and the Trump administration's destabilizing effort to purge the federal workforce has represented an unprecedented assault, deliberately targeting the economic mobility and middle-class stability that millions of Black families have achieved through federal service. This is the broader context that makes Crockett's Senate run so important, why it matters beyond just one race or one state. She's running at a moment when Trump is systematically dismantling every pathway to Black economic and political advancement, and her candidacy represents resistance, not just to one policy or one politician, but to an entire project of reestablishing racial hierarchy as the organizing principle of American governance. And here's another bombshell that reveals how significant this race could become. In 2018, Rep. Beto O'Rourke came within just a few points of defeating Cruz as part of a nationwide blue wave that allowed Democrats to flip control of the House, and at the moment, forecasters say signs are pointing to another strong midterm performance for Democrats, which means Crockett is running in what could be the most favorable electoral environment for Democrats in Texas in decades, potentially riding a wave of backlash against Trump's second-term excesses. But she's not running the Beto playbook of trying to be everything to everyone, of live-streaming every moment, of promising to visit every county in Texas, including the ones where Republicans win by 50 points. She believes the only way to win in Texas is if there's a candidate that can add to the electorate, rather than relying on the same electorate that's produced Republican victories for 30 years, which is such a fundamentally correct analysis that you wonder why it took Democrats so long to figure it out. The demographic reality of Texas should give Republicans nightmares if they were paying attention. The state is becoming younger, more diverse, more urban, with massive population growth in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio, cities where Democrats win overwhelming majorities, but where turnout has historically lagged behind rural Republican strongholds. What Crockett is betting on is that a candidate who speaks directly to young Black and Latino voters, who doesn't moderate her message or apologize for her beliefs, who fights Trump with the same brass-knuckled ferocity that Trump uses against his opponents, can fundamentally alter the composition of the Texas electorate. And before the skeptics start concern trolling about electability, remember that in the 2024 Senate race, Ted Cruz won a majority of Hispanic and Latino voters in the election and won re-election by improving on his 2018 margin by 6 points and flipping 13 counties, which should have been a wake-up call that running moderate candidates who won't take strong positions or fight back aggressively isn't a winning strategy, that working-class voters of all backgrounds are looking for someone who will actually disrupt the system rather than promise to manage it more efficiently. Now, when that White House spokesperson says Trump thinks Crockett is wholly unqualified, what they're really revealing is the administration's terror of having to face someone in a high-profile race who won't be intimidated, who will call Trump a liar to his face, who will point out his criminality and corruption and cruelty without flinching. Crockett said, "When you stand up to a bully, you win. Do not back down. Do not bend. You allow them to go and wage their threats," articulating a theory of resistance that Democrats should have embraced years ago, instead of perpetually bringing fact-checkers to a knife fight. Think about what Trump is actually afraid of here, because it's not that Crockett might win, though that would obviously be catastrophic for Republican Senate majority. It's that she represents a model of Democratic politics that could inspire other candidates to stop apologizing and start fighting, that could fundamentally reshape how Democrats communicate with voters. Imagine if instead of 10 more Joe Manchins or Kyrsten Sinemas or other Democrats who spend more time attacking their own party than confronting Republicans, we had 10 more Jasmine Crocketts willing to call out fascism by name. The stakes of this race extend far beyond who represents Texas in the Senate for the next 6 years. Texas is critical to Democrats' long-shot hopes of reclaiming a Senate majority in next year's elections, and GOP incumbent John Cornyn is facing the toughest primary race of his 24-year Senate career, which means Republicans are going to emerge from their primary bloodied and broke, having spent months proving their MAGA bona fides to an increasingly extreme base, potentially nominating someone like Ken Paxton, who comes with massive ethical baggage and legal controversies. And here's where Crockett's viral moments and social media savvy become not a liability but potentially her greatest asset. Her online reach is bigger than every other Texas Democrat, with the exception of Rep. Joaquin Castro of San Antonio, who has served a decade longer than Crockett has, and her unfiltered musings and barbs while in Congress have helped her amass one of the largest social media followings in the Texas delegation, which means she already has the infrastructure to reach millions of Texans directly without having to go through traditional media gatekeepers who would filter her message or demand that she moderate her positions. The generational dimension here cannot be overstated, Because Crockett speaks the political language of young voters who've grown up watching politicians lie smoothly while their futures are stolen, who've seen climate change ignored, who've graduated into an economy where housing is unaffordable and healthcare could bankrupt you, who watch their reproductive rights disappear, who understand that the system is fundamentally rigged against them. They don't want another politician promising incremental change. They want someone who will burn down the corrupt structures and build something new. Crockett has seen her star rise over the past year as she emerged as an outspoken critic of Trump and the GOP, earning Trump's ire in the process, which in the bizarre logic of contemporary politics is actually an advantage because Trump's attacks give her credibility with Democratic voters who are desperate for their leaders to fight back rather than seek compromise with fascists. Every time Trump calls her low IQ or unqualified, every time he attacks her, he's actually building her brand with the exact voters she needs to turn out. Now the establishment Democrats and their consultant class are going to spend the next few months concern trolling about Crockett's electability, publishing think pieces about how she needs to moderate her message, move to the center, appeal to suburban moderates, all the same tired advice that's produced nothing but losses for 30 years in Texas. But James Tallarico is just about as progressive as Crockett, which means the Democratic primary will actually be a competition between two genuinely progressive candidates, rather than a race between progressivism and centrism, potentially producing a nominee who hasn't been forced to abandon their principles. And here's the delicious irony that Republicans haven't quite processed yet. Trump's comments echoed Cornyn's reaction upon learning Crockett was entering the race when he said, "Am I hiding my glee? I'll try to wipe the smile off my face. I would say it's a gift," which is exactly what Republicans said about Barack Obama in 2008, about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 2018, about every insurgent candidate who's disrupted their plans by speaking directly to voters rather than playing by the established rules. The historical parallel to draw here is Reconstruction and its aftermath, when black political leaders were elected to Congress and state legislatures across the South following the Civil War, representing a brief moment when multiracial democracy seemed possible before white supremacists deployed violence, legal manipulation, and economic coercion to destroy it. We're living through an attempted recreation of that counter-revolutionary project as Trump and MAGA Republicans try to roll back the gains of the civil rights movement and restore racial hierarchy, and black women like Jasmine Crockett are standing directly in their path. The question for Democrats isn't whether Crockett is too outspoken, or too progressive, or too uncompromising. The question is whether the party has the courage to support a candidate who actually represents the future, rather than clinging to strategies that have failed repeatedly. Hours before Crockett made her plans official, former Rep. Colin Allred dropped his Senate bid to instead run for a House seat, effectively clearing the way for a two-person race between Crockett and State Rep. James Tallarico, another rising star within the party, and Democrats see the contest as integral to their efforts to flip the Senate next year, which means the party establishment is going to have to choose whether to embrace this new model or try to undermine it. This is the moment. This is the test. This is where we find out whether Democrats have learned anything from the disasters of the past decade, or whether they're going to keep running the same failed playbook. Jasmine Crockett is offering them a lifeline, a candidate who can energize the base, who can expand the electorate, who can fight Trump on terms that actually resonate with voters rather than pretending that policy papers and wonkish explainers will save democracy. And when she tells Texas, "I'm coming for you," referring to Trump, she's running to protect Texans from attacks and safeguard the rights the Constitution guarantees. She's not just making a campaign promise. She's declaring war on an administration that has spent years trying to destroy every black woman who dares to challenge its authority. The choice before Texas Democrats, and really before the National Party, is whether they want to win or whether they want to maintain the comfortable fiction that moderation and compromise will somehow defeat fascism. Jasmine Crockett has already chosen. She's already in the fight, and that White House spokesperson's dismissive comment about her being wholly unqualified is going to look absolutely ridiculous when she's sworn in as a United States Senator representing the great state of Texas.